Hi, everyone. I'm Beth Rebay, the Director of Repair, and I'm really delighted to be joining all of you today for our event entitled Racism and Predatory Care, Courts, Disability Law, and Conservatorship Abuse. Before we dive into the primary program, I want to begin with a land acknowledgement. Repair would like to acknowledge the Gabriel and Tongva peoples as the traditional land caretakers of Tobangar, the Los Angeles Basin and South Channel Islands. And we are grateful to have the opportunity to work for the Taraha Tone, the indigenous peoples in this place. We pay our respects to Hanukvatam, the ancestors, Ahihi Ram, the elders, and Eohimkam, our relatives and relations, past, present, and emerging. Before we dive into our primary program, I also just really want to take a second to thank our co-sponsors for this event, including the Center for Racial and Economic Justice at UC Hastings School of Law, with particular thanks to their director, Elena Ball, who's been really helpful in preparing this program, and the Consortium on Law, Science, and Health Policy, a project jointly located in the University of California at San Francisco and the University of California at Hastings, and the Critical Race Studies program at the UCLA School of Law. We're really excited to have some of our law and medical colleagues co-sponsoring this event and excited to proceed because this conversation needs to happen. We're joined today by 4 guests, and they're each contributing different things, as you might imagine, to the conversation. We'll be joined shortly by Kennett Taylor, but already have with us Venus Gist. And Kennett and Venus are both people who've been very intimately affected by conservatorship abuse and have experiences to relay, which also implicate some of its racial dynamics. Once we get to hear a bit from Venus and Kennett, we'll be joined by Tanya Dennis. I'll share more about her, but she's a wonderful journalist who's been working on this issue for some time. And then we're gonna be concluding with some comments from Rick Black, who joins us for the Center for Estate Administration Reform. And we should have a little time for dialogue between the conversants today and engagement with any questions our audience add to the chat. So that's our plan. We're going to be here for about an hour from now. We're set to run for a maximum of 75 minutes. And I'm really, again, honored and grateful that we get to make this conversation happen because it's quite badly needed. So I want to invite Venus first to share a little bit more, but before I do, I'd like to tell you a little bit about her. Venus just has an MS, and the events that lead to her being with us today began in 2017 and 2018, and particularly on Valentine's Day of 2018, when she and other family members rescued her elderly mother, Catherine Carter, from a residential care facility where Miss Carter had been placed by a court-appointed professional conservator. Venus and her family planned and executed the rescue after witnessing that her mother was being maltreated while supposedly under this care. Venus was told by the conservator and the conservator's attorney that her mother would only live 3 to 6 months. But 4 years later, Miss Carter is alive, doing well, and turned 87 years old in December of 2020. Venus is passionate about advocating for abused elders and families to protect their assets from corrupt courtrooms and predatory conservators and guardians nationwide. She educates communities by lecturing and by hosting screenings of the documentary film The Guardians. Venus had the honor of proposing Senate Bill 303 with California State Senator Bob Wachowski before the California State Senate Committee, and in October of 2019, Governor Gavin Newsom signed Senate Bill 303, which she collaborated in proposing into law in order to help protect federal benefits and private residents of conservatees. And Venus has also been part of the community of folks trying to address some of the racial politics of conservatorship in Oakland, California. So it's really wonderful that we have her here. Before we begin questions, I just want to share a photo that Venus shared with me, just looking for it in screen share, see if that gets it. Oh, it looks like it's not coming through. So Venus shared a really wonderful photo of her mother. We'll try to get that up in a few minutes. But she is indeed going strong at 87. So it means a lot to get to hear from her daughter today and to think of Catherine as we begin this conversation. So Venus, I want to begin by asking you to tell us a little bit more just about who your mother is as a person. So before we dive into what happened to her when she was conserved, what was your relationship like? Who is she? Who was she? What should we know about her?
Well, again, her name is Catherine Carter, my mom. She gave birth to 2 children. I have a younger sister, a few years younger. My mom worked at Cal State. At the time, it was called Cal State University of Hayward. And that's where she retired. Can't remember what year. She's been out of there for a while now. She worked in the Warren Hall building, the one they demolished on the 6th floor. She was the manager of human resources. And she gave her time there, retired, and just began to enjoy life. She was a great mother, very loving. I was sharing this, I think, with someone that on Sundays, she would make Sunday dinner and all my friends would come over and eat up the food that my mother cooked. So my friends loved her and she loved my friends. And yeah, that was mom. That was mom.
Just curious, did she have particular favorite things of yours that she made?
Yes, German chocolate cake from scratch. Her greens and her fried chicken was delicious. And those are the things you miss. In 2011, she was diagnosed with dementia. And of course it progressed, and we just wanted to take care of her. That's all we wanted. And thank God she's alive. So
I'm grateful that she is. So how did she become conserved? How did that happen?
Yes, let me get my phone back on. Well, I petitioned the court for conservatorship. There was family disagreement. And, I thought that the courts could work it out, support us, and get mom the care that she needed. Little did I know how the court system operated. The probate court is what we were dealing with. Some people deal with family court. And after a while, I realized that the judge wasn't going to give me the conservatorship. He appointed a conservator. Sometimes they appoint conservators or a legal guardian. So
this was like an independent professional, not part of your family.
Exactly. Someone who doesn't really know the family. And I mean, that's fine. Sometimes they're needed, but it's the teamwork that makes a difference. So the family members know their family members.
So this outside person became your mom's conservator. And, what happened as a result? So once they took over your mother's person and her estate and decisions, what did they do?
Well, my mother, for a while, she had to be placed in a facility and she needed the physical therapy. So she was placed in a skilled nursing facility. And the judge had appointed me, the conservator. And I even said for a while, because of what was going on within the family, that was okay. Let's work it out and move things forward. But what happened was my mother was taken out of the facility, kind of like snatched out abruptly when her insurance still covered her, and put in a residential care facility, almost like a board and care, where she began to decline.
And when you say that she was declining, what are some of the things that you noticed?
Right. Well, in this facility, it was very kind of packed. Like the people were in there. It was the majority of Black American people in this facility. It was a home, and this one family room is where all the clients spent their time. They were like I said, packed in kind of, to me, like sardines, with not much activity, kind of slumped over in their positions. And my mom was walking and thriving when we left Genesis skilled nursing facility. And there's a difference because you get the care there. You get the physical therapy, you get the occupational therapy, you get the speech therapy. So none of that was readily available for my mom when she walked out of that facility that we took her out of, and didn't want to walk in the facility that the conservator placed her in.
Okay. So she was really deteriorating in terms of her activity level. Was she injured at all? I think you might have mentioned when we were preparing for this that she wound up with a broken tooth.
Yes, we don't know how it happened. Her front tooth ended up breaking in the facility. No one seemed to know what occurred. Her face was in a frown all the time. Just so the audience knows, my mother didn't have any vocal ability, said very few words because of her dementia diagnosis. So basically she was just declining. She wouldn't really eat. And the food there was not the kind of food that I prepared for my mother. I am very health conscious, and I serve my mother a very, high nutrient filled, meal, and they didn't. And so I was getting very concerned, observing my mom just kind of declining, not walking. I remember one day we came to visit, my husband held her up and, tried to get her to walk, and she just, wouldn't. And I just really got scared.
Okay. Thank you for sharing a little bit more about that context. Did they give you any explanation of why she was being put in this other facility, even though her insurance would continue to pay for the skilled nursing facility?
The only reason that I can see, and that what happens in this industry, is that they have relationships with these people, regardless of what you want, which I did. Well, first of all, she told me that she culturally appropriately placed my mother in a facility. She culturally appropriately placed her. What does that mean? You're supposed to place people according to their health needs and requirements, which at the time my mom was stricken with stage 4 kidney disease. So none of that was addressed. High blood pressure, she did have her medication, and a few other issues. And then her dementia, and the facility where she was in was addressing all of those issues. They had recreation, it was the Christmas season, they had music come in, great physical therapists.
So what I think I'm hearing, tell me if I've got this right, is that the skilled nursing facility had a wider range of services, and was it racially inclusive? Did it have, elders of various backgrounds?
Yes, it did. Very diverse.
They moved your mother to a space that was mostly elderly Black people who were being neglected. Yeah. And the only explanation was that that was culturally appropriate.
Yeah, in my observation. It wasn't the level of care what she was taken from.
Okay. So what did you decide to do?
So I complained, probably got on their nerves, because I was like, my mom's not thriving here. This is not the level of care that she requires. And eventually they thought she might have had a urinary tract infection, and they took her over to the hospital. They had her transported to the hospital. And from there, they transported her to another facility that I wasn't particularly crazy about, but was better than this facility. But I had located a very nice, I remember they were a Hungarian family. They were very nurturing. The mother and I talked. She made homemade food, beautiful room. I have pictures of it to this day. I showed it to the conservator, and she said, I'm not sending her there. Because again, they have the relationships with these people, so they all make money together.
Meaning the people who ran the home that they were placing.
The people who run the facility, yes.
Okay, good, that makes sense. Thank you for clarifying. So what did you ultimately decide to do next?
So after, even in this facility where my mom did a little better, and I had to be the one to call in the physical therapist and the occupational therapist to come to the facility, visit, and provide services for my mother. And they did. I went every day to see my mother because she was supposed to be on her way back home. This was just a temporary situation, just so everybody's clear, until some of the family, dynamics worked out. And it didn't look like she was going back home. It didn't look like it. She was declining. There was a couple of times her feet had edema. And I think probably Rick and Tanya would remember this picture of her feet looking like an elephant, both feet looking like elephants. And she was, I didn't care at that time. I called the ambulance. No, I didn't call, I took her myself and to the hospital. And the conservator basically told me that it was a wasted trip. Her blood pressure was over like 200.
Oh my God.
get her feet, like I said, my mother was lethargic, and we went to Eaton Hospital, and she basically told me that was a wasted trip.
Well,
She had her transported back to the facility later that night.
so we know that you, from your introduction, we've already shared with our audience that you made the decision to basically just try to rescue her. What did that practically mean? What'd you do?
Okay, so enough was enough. And, we had visitations. Our family was, divided at the time, but my father and I began to come together and see that mom was declining and she wasn't going to make it. And first of all, I want to say that I was looking for help. I was like scared. I said, they're killing my mom. She's going to die. What do I do? So my cousin introduced me to the Oakland Post. There's a group of advocates there, the probate reform movement. And from there, they introduced me to that beautiful lady back there called Tanya Dennis. And I was so glad to meet her. And Tanya is an advocate, oh my gosh, from head to toe. She doesn't like messiness and nastiness and evilness. And Tanya and I began to talk. I shared my story. Tanya said she would help me, and she did. So after a while of observing how the court was going, I provided a letter from my mother's doctor saying, move Miss Carter to a higher level of care, not a boarding care, not a residential care, but a skilled nursing facility. And the court would not do it. We had LAS, legal assistant for seniors, involved. We had the judge, the attorney. These people would not budge. And my attorney was trying to help me as much as he could. And so it was to the point of fear. And I talked with my family and Tanya about taking her out, just going to get her. They're not taking care of her. She's going to die. No, I'll risk whatever. And Tanya and I talked. Tanya's an advocate. She has her own testimony about advocacy, and other things regarding race issues and this situation. And she'll tell you about it more. And we worked it out on February the 14th, 2018, Valentine's Day. My family, with Tonya Dennis and a group from the Oakland Post, the community advocates, went in and got my mother out of the facility and took her home.
Did the conservator retaliate?
Retaliate, they wanted to. The conservator, her attorney, and I guess legal assistant for seniors, they wanted to sanction us and they wanted to put us in jail, but the judge said no. And the reason why I believe he said no is because there were too many eyes watching. Tanya is a writer for the Oakland Post. Tanya did quite a few stories on this topic. Perils of, what's called, Tanya? Perils of Probate. Perils of Probate. That was it. Many stories. You can go back and look at previous issues. And Tanya did a story on us. She did like 2 stories. And Tanya and the crew were all in the courtroom on the day that we had to return to the courtroom after taking mom out. That's the thing. We took her home and we barricaded ourselves in. Okay. The police did come to the door and we just, wanted to be protected at times, protect mom. So anyway, I'm starting to think about it. So.
I'm sure it's intense even to remember. And it had to be an amazing feeling to have activists and journalists just, sort of surrounding your family. I think you'd mentioned as we were preparing that the judge in question had a reputation for being pretty racist towards Black families. And so the fact that in that context,
yes,
you were able to keep your mother at home, I don't think we could explain that any other way than that there was a real community upsurge around you.
Yes.
So once you basically were allowed to keep her out of that facility and you had her back at home and she was starting to recover, did the conservator leave your mother alone afterwards?
No, well, we returned to court and the judge dropped the case with prejudice and he returned the physical person back to my father. But what happens is they usually do this a lot. They left the conservator or the legal guardians over the estate, which means they're in control of the money. So even though my mother's physical person was at home, they were still over her estate. And the judge did, let's see, we did that in February. We rescued her February 14th, 2018. So the judge had made an order for July for her to wrap up the fees and do her final accounting and dismiss. But that didn't happen for 2 years later. And so in between that time, they tried to go after a rental property. The conservator actually went to the rental property where the renters live and demanded that they turn over the rents to her.
And I think you had shared that this property was jointly owned by your mother and your father, right?
Exactly.
He also owned it and certainly wasn't conserved by anyone. So that's pretty extraordinary. Did they succeed? Did they get the tenants' rent money?
No. Fortunately, the tenants are very loyal to my father, and they also called their attorney, and their attorney did some research and said, you know, these people are bad news, the conservator, and they weren't scared. And that doesn't usually happen either. Some tenants are scared and they're going to do what the paperwork says, right? And they did. So
okay. But did they succeed in taking some money out of your mother's estate? Did they get some of her property?
They did. They confiscated, I say. They took her Social Security and her retirement benefits for a while. And then I got them reinstated 1 year. And this went on, like I said, for a few years after my mother's home. There's no reason to keep the money. We need the money for our mom, right? But yet the judge, they moved him from the court, and everything you want to say, you have to file a motion, you know, and there's always new judges, or you have to pay for an attorney, and then you have to deal with the family dynamics and make sure you're on one accord. So there's a lot of dynamics and factors here to move forward to get rid of them.
To get them out of your family's finances.
Yes.
Did the court ultimately take any action to prevent them from doing this to anyone in future? Were they held accountable in any way for taking money out of your mother's estate, even though they weren't putting any of it towards her care?
No, it's this, you have to, along the journey, you know, with people like Tanya, organizations like Cedar, Rick, Sear, you know, we all, you know, got to know each other and inform each other and help each other on what's the next. We went to our politicians, not really much the DA's office, spoke to the DA investigator, but nothing moves, you know, to save the lives of elderly people. And, you know, in this case, my mother.
So how are you? How's your mom now? How's your family doing now?
She is home and she's alive. Like you said earlier in your readings, you said they gave her 3 to 6 months to live. There was nothing terminally ill about my mother. She has dementia, not cancer. So when the conservator wanted to put her on hospice, it was like, for what? And
decided it was time for her to die.
Yeah, and I'm like, no, she's not dying. What is this? So 3 to 6 months to live, gave her a year. I guess she put 24 months just to cover herself. But my mother surpassed that. It's been, what is this, 2022 almost? And I mean, I feed her, you know, these are some of the things that a daughter, remember this audience, that family members want to do. We want to give them good holistic food. They put terrible comments about me and being into health and thinking that's going to cure my mom's dementia. Well, it sure helps and supports it, because my mom's alive right now on supplements, no medication, you know, gets physical therapy, gets lymph massages that opens up her brain. And I mean, all sorts of things that can help the elderly that the courts should know about, instead of just giving them drugs and letting them die and deteriorate.
Thank you so much for sharing all this. So I found a photo. I did find the photo I was trying to share with the audience earlier. Just want to take a look. This is your mom. And yeah, hi, Catherine.
Yeah, that's Mom. Does she look like she's dying, audience? Does she look like, I don't think so.
Thank you so much for sharing this. So we're going to be joined in a moment by Ken, but I think he just stepped out to get his notes for this. But audience members, this is a great time to just acknowledge if you want to Tanya's story, and also share any questions you have for her in the chat. So feel free to take just a second to do that. I will be introducing Kennett as soon as he returns to us.
Yes. And can you hear me, Beth, right now? Can they hear me?
Yeah, you're still unmuted.
Oh, yeah. I just wanted to say to the audience is that, we hope and pray that you all never have to experience anything like this. If you are experiencing it, reach out to any of us, and put your information in the chat, but we just are here for you. Not just about our stories, but I see many faces that they have stories here too. Like Hillary, I can see her, and Rick and Tanya, and we just are here for your support.
That's beautiful. Let's see. Okay, we've got Ken back with us. Ken, were you able to get your notes okay? Or do you still need them? I think you're muted, Ken, if you want to join us.
I'm muted now. I can't get the script up.
Okay.
It says it's not they'll send me an email notice. Oh yeah, there it is.
Okay, good.
All right.
So once you're ready to go, let us know. We're ready for you.
Okay.
Thank you. While we're transitioning to all the folks who are sharing their stories in the chat, it's really heartbreaking to read some of what's happening. One question someone is posing is this: as a single person with no kids, how can I avoid this as I make my own care plans? So we won't try to answer that question fully now, but yes, when we get to Tanya and Rick, I hope that you'll engage that one. I wanted to flag it for us. Ken, I'm going to start to introduce you, and once I'm done, and dive right in if that works.
I'm going to do it on my cell phone so I can read the script really well.
Okay, we do whatever you need.
I'm going to do the Zoom off my cell phone.
Okay.
So
so you're going to log back in is what you're telling us?
Well, I'll tell you what I can do. Oh, can I print this?
If that helps you, yeah. I'm going to start to introduce you. We're going to keep this thing moving along.
Okay.
So I'm going to start to introduce you. If we need to make any adjustments, we will make them. We'll work it out. Technology is going to work for us today. So to our audience, you've been getting to hear some of our logistics wrangling, but I'm really honored to not just be joined by Venus today, but by Kennett Taylor. So Ken is a native of Oakland, California, and he started his career at the age of 14 after being hired by the Ford Foundation as an assistant teacher. He bought his first home at the age of 18 and advanced his career in accounting and finance. I just have to stop and notice that you bought your first home at the age of 18. That's pretty amazing. And advanced his career in accounting and finance and expanded into sales, realty, entertainment media. He also co-owned and ran a supper club in Oakland called the Cold Duck, and became a tournament winner and nationally rated chess player for the United States Chess Federation. Currently, he's the CEO and founder of Environmental Energy LLC and is committed to addressing climate change. In 2011, he married Eleanor Freyricks, his friend and neighbor of 10 years. They've got a great story. And Ken and Eleanor's marriage was annulled against both of their wishes by a professional conservator appointed by Alameda County, California, ostensibly to protect Eleanor as an elderly white woman from undue influence by her husband, Ken, and some of their other Black friends. Ken, are you up for a first question? Ready to go?
I'm ready.
Okay, beautiful. So I want to just, again, sort of help folks think about Eleanor and who she is and was as we first start. So can you tell us, how'd you meet and what was she like? What kind of person is Eleanor?
Well, the way we met was Eleanor came up to my front door and knocked on the front door, asking for help to get her car started. Mm-hmm. And of course, I came to the door. When I came to the door and she mentioned it, I told her I'd be right down. I had to take off my pajamas that she still talks about, and I'll be right down. So I changed my clothes, came down, got a car started. And as we began to talk, I saw that she was very funny. She would crack jokes all the time. And then she was very feisty, very bold. And then I realized we had a lot in common, personality-wise, politics-wise. sports wise, she loved Tiger Woods, would only watch Tiger, all his, when he was real famous, tournaments, but she wouldn't watch golf like me if he didn't play. We laughed about that as well. She told me she had moved here from Missouri during her family was one of the 49ers. And one of her qualities was, besides being as funny or funnier, everybody said she was funnier than Betty White. She even had her own comedy show in Southern California. It was a radio comedy show, her and another gentleman. And so she informed me about all her past, and we had similar backgrounds in a lot of ways. Then she mentioned she never wanted anyone to tell her what to do. She wouldn't even let me open up her car door. She was totally independent, and she would always say, I'm independent. I'll close my own door. So she always was like that. And then she told me about her background. She served in World War II. And she just loved America. But she referred to that whole government service. And when she became under the threat of a conservatorship, she didn't understand it. And she says, this country is like being in Germany, like dealing with the Gestapo. In fact, she's recorded as saying that. Mm-hmm. So she was very upset at that point.
Mm-hmm. One of the things you told me when you were telling me the story of your relationship was that there was an empty lot between your houses, and she used to refer to it as Lover's Lane.
Oh, absolutely. I would when we got to know each other, it was a short walk through my backyard into her backyard. There was a little trail there, and I would bring her coffee in the morning, freshly ground. And so she called that lane Lover's Lane, referring to her and I. That one day I'm gonna walk across there and she's gonna grab me. And so that was that about the Lover's Lane.
Yeah, I see what you mean about her being feisty. So we know that you got married 10 years ago in 2011, and by that time you had been dating and been neighbors and good friends for about a decade before you got married. So how did the question of Eleanor being conserved come up? What happened?
What happened was, after her husband died and passed away, her son had already passed away. Her husband, her estranged husband at that time, lived with another gentleman named Bob, and he had all of her files on all her properties, the deeds, all the bank accounts, checkbooks, all her assets were in this guy's possession. And then Annette and Eleanor and I, we drove to Vallejo to retrieve her belongings. When we got there, he wouldn't give Eleanor her stuff. So at that point, we called the police, and police came. He told the police he had to grieve, which was crazy because he wasn't even a relative. What was he grieving about? He was just trying to buy time. And so then we left, came back later, and then the police finally ordered him and helped bring all the stuff from the TV to all the boxes of deeds and properties and records, and brought them on out themselves because he didn't want to release it. So at that point, in between there, after the first trip, Annette, who's a retired RN, she suggested calling Adult Protective Services because it was abuse that she was going through, and she had been greatly abused by her husband. So we called Adult Protective Services, and then when they arrived at Eleanor's house, I was there with another gentleman cleaning up, doing some work inside the house, and all the attention wasn't on the gentleman we called them about, this guy Bob. All the attention came by the investigator from Adult Protective Services on me. She began to question me, and her questions were indicating that there was a racial tint to her questions. And that's how Adult Protective Services became involved.
So you and Eleanor subsequently got married, and how did she react to adult protective services? How was she feeling about them sort of, investigating your relationship?
Oh, she was very, very angry.
Mm.
And so she knew she was under attack.
Mhm. Gotcha. And was there any evidence at this point? Had Eleanor had a psychological exam? Had anybody said that she was mentally deficient or lacking competency in any way? Was there any proof of that anywhere?
No proof of it anywhere, I believe, until this day, this very minute. Eleanor is just as quick. And when I got a chance to see her that one time, she was cracking jokes. And all of that is in the audio that you have a copy of. I think you said you would post it, but she is very hilarious, very funny.
And just to confirm, she did have like a psychological examination or two, and
She
they
had
found
to.
that she was competent.
I suggested that to her after her attorney said it to both of us, she should get a psychological evaluation, and which she did. Two prominent psychiatrists came up with the same conclusion, that she's as alert and cognitive as anybody else. She passed all the tests, all the questions. She got high marks on her cognitive, being cognitive. She scored very high.
And did they, in those psych evaluations, find any indication that she was being abused or threatened or needed help? Like, were the psychologists saying that initially?
No.
Okay. So who actually tried to conserve Eleanor? Was it Adult Protective Services?
It was Adult Protective Services. When Molly found out she was worth maybe $6 million or $8 million.
So Molly was the woman from Adult.
She was the investigator. When
Okay.
she found that out, that's when she turned it over to the public guardian to have her conserved, because she did not want her or me to be together.
Okay, so basically she said Eleanor should be conserved since she has money in order to protect her from her husband, you.
Right. And what the allegation was that it was undue influence on my part. They made some wild accusation of undue influence, and Eleanor made it clear to the conservator, the potential conservator, to the investigator, she was not under any influence, that she loved me, that she told him she chased me, she pursued me, and she's in love with me. And she also said, no man has treated her as good as I have treated her in her entire life. And then she even told them how I was the first person, the court investigator came over. We were both there. She even told the court investigator that I was the first person to bring her flowers in 70 years.
So one of the things that you told me when we were preparing for our event today was that she, Adult Protective Services petitioned the court to conserve Eleanor, and also reached out to one of the court psychologists who wrote a report saying that Eleanor's life was in danger because of this undue influence. So who and what was she saying was a threat to Eleanor's life?
What she said, the psychiatrist, after she was contacted, she changed her report. She hadn't published it yet, but I was very honest and forthright with the Adult Protective Services. And I mentioned that there was a psychiatrist who already evaluated Eleanor. So what ended up happening was this lady, Molly, she contacted the psychiatrist, had her change her report into me being a threat, quote unquote, I'm imposing. And then Ned and another lady that were elderly who were friends of mine and Eleanor's, she, in her report, put that she was fearful of Eleanor's life, that the trio, she referred to me and two elderly college graduated ladies as a trio that might kill Eleanor.
So 3 Black people, you and two of her Black friends. She thought you would all kill her.
Right. To get her money.
So did Eleanor have an attorney trying to fight the conservatorship?
Unfortunately, the attorney that I hired for her. He turned on me. His name is Scott Jordan. Still is that he is still, from what I understand, her personal attorney.
Mm. And you told me some of what he said to you when you were telling him that you and Eleanor just wanted to stay together and she didn't want to be conserved. What did he tell you?
He got very angry as I questioned him. And then I asked him, was he a Republican? And then he got, why are you asking that question? I said, well, because I just want to. You live in Danville, and I'd like to know, because what's going on here doesn't make sense. So he finally got angry. After I asked a couple other questions, he jumped up out of the seat. Mr. Taylor, what you have to understand is that you are a younger Black man and she is an older white woman. Right then, I knew, and it just blew me away. Mm. He admitted that this is a racially motivated situation and she's got too much money to give to somebody of color. Wow. Okay. So he basically was saying there's no way you can be allowed to stay with Eleanor and inherit her estate. Correct. And this was from her personal attorney. Yes. And was she able to just fire him? Did she have that right? No, what happened was on the first initial court appearances, Eleanor was, she had dysentery because this was really upsetting her, this whole fiasco. And so she didn't show up to the first couple of court cases. And then when the case occurred for her conservatorship, I was there. I had already received a restraining order. So. And the conservator took that out against you? Yes, he put a restraining order on me, said that they charged, and the complaint was that I was unduly influencing Eleanor, I guess, to get married or whatever the influence was that I still don't know to this day. And Eleanor doesn't know what the influence was because she didn't get influenced by me. Eleanor is independent. She makes up her own mind. She does her own thing. Okay. So Eleanor was conserved by the court, which, took away again her power to fire her attorney. And so her, attorney and the conservator were working in tandem. What happened to her? Well, one little point that's very important that I didn't share with you is when I showed up in court the day of the conservatorship that was going to go into conservatorship, the guardian ad litem, Kirsten Voiles, went downstairs and got the sheriff, and the sheriff came up and put me out of the building. They did not want me even in the court. They put me out of the building to keep her just with Scott Jordan and the other attorneys who were all charging her an enormous amount of money, 5 of them. And so then go back to your question. I forgot to mention that. Okay. So the court was allowing them to bill her, not allowing them to fire her, and they kept you out of the courtroom. And what happened to her as she was conserved? Where did she go? I assume she wasn't allowed to stay. Like Eleanor said, didn't know where she went until the one time me and Linda Kincaid and Annette and a few others got a chance to meet with her. She said she was hidden away at some locked facility for 2 weeks. Then she was put into another locked facility for 8 months. And then she ended up with Scott Phipps at the building in Oakland. I don't know if she's still there because they were charging the estate $6,000 a month plus to stay there when she had her own home. So they put her in some sort of facility and began billing her estate for that as well, and she couldn't go home. What happened to your marriage? They annulled the marriage, and interestingly, I showed up in court and with a special an attorney for that day, and that attorney pleaded, but the judge didn't want to hear it because I didn't even get served papers. They said they published it in the San Francisco Examiner, where I used to live in San Francisco County. So they published the annulment in the San Francisco Examiner without even serving me.
So they just annulled your marriage without her consent, without your consent.
and without her consent.
Mm-hmm.
And she was very upset about it.
Mm-hmm. I can imagine. So you mostly, I assume after that, were you allowed to see her again once the marriage was annulled?
Just that one time.
One time, okay. And Ken, I know you shared that when you got to see her, you went with Linda Kincaid, who's with the Coalition for Elder and Dependent Adult Rights. And you were able to, talk with Eleanor and record an interview with her. So what we'll do is share with our Zoom audience and with our YouTube audience the link to that interview so that they can hear what Eleanor had to say about all this directly.
That would be wonderful.
Yeah, no, I think that's important. And so the conservator and the facility and the attorney were all able to keep billing her estate. Do you have any idea what happened to her money, whether any of it's left, whether they've spent it all?
It went from 6 to 8 million down to under $1 million, and that was about 3 years ago. I would imagine all that money is gone now.
Okay.
They were submitting bills for $57,000 for this law firm and that law firm and Scott Jordan. They were just bilking the estate for no reason whatsoever.
And a lot of that money was just being spent fighting off your and her attempts to end the conservatorship, like they could pay themselves out of her estate to do that. Is that right?
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any idea how she's doing now? I know the last time you said you saw her.
I have no idea. There's a public guardian, Alameda County, who's in charge of her. And there's also an attorney. I sent you the email, the attorney for Alameda County. And when I called, try to get in touch, and other people, they don't return the calls if it has something to do with Eleanor.
So the county has her and no one will answer questions.
No.
And is she allowed to see anybody from her old life? Any friends? Nobody?
No, she's not allowed to see anyone.
Okay. And I think you mentioned that's by court order. Her conservator went and said she shouldn't have contact with anyone without their permission.
Right. That happened shortly after that one time I got a chance to see Eleanor. Linda Kincaid and I, and like I said, I brought some witnesses with me. And right after that, they filed a motion with the court to deny her having any rights. Phone calls, she cannot receive phone calls, cannot make phone calls. And she has no rights now, even though it's against California state law.
So I know this had to be beyond traumatic and exhausting to keep fighting and to keep losing these battles. Are there still efforts to free Eleanor? Is anyone fighting for her today? Besides
I'm still fighting for her today. I just received some paperwork from a friend of mine who works in my environmental company. She's a law clerk out of Philadelphia and lives in Philadelphia. She sent me some paperwork to submit to courts. And then I'm going to, because on the restraining order, it became permanent. They didn't even serve me any papers on the permanent restraining order. Everything was fraudulent that they did. Everything was to keep me. And since Eleanor had no relatives, that was the problem. She was the only child. And when they found out she was the only child, that's when the stuff really hit the fan.
Right. She had no protectors.
Right.
Who were other white people, basically.
Exactly.
I know you also mentioned that there's still work going on through the Coalition for Elder and Dependent Adult Rights, CEDAR, so folks can visit their website to think about how they can help. I want to turn, first, Ken, I want to thank you so much. This is a brutal set of things to have to lay out before strangers, and I know you and Venus both have been telling your stories for a long time, but the vulnerability of it deserves to be honored and acknowledged. I can understand why you would do it, given that Eleanor is still trapped, but I still have to just thank you and honor what you're doing today.
I appreciate all the exposure that you're bringing to this. This is just a travesty that people need to be very alert of and aware of their own relatives, especially if they have money. If they don't have any money, there's nothing for anybody to worry about. But if they got a lot of money, there needs to be a lot of worry and concern.
Thank you. So I want to transition now and introduce Tonya Dennis. And I'm really delighted to have Tanya here because she's been, unfortunately and fortunately, both a real path maker. I say unfortunately because she started to cover this issue when it really wasn't getting attention. While there were certainly other journalists, though not many, who were starting to cover conservatorship and guardianship abuse in the last decade, Tanya is literally the only journalist I found who's paying attention to the impact of conservatorship and guardianship abuse on communities of color. She's a reporter for the Post News Group, the largest African-American newspaper in Northern California, a retired educator, and the founder and general manager of Izubu Muntu West African Dance Company, located in Richmond, Virginia. That's a lot of work to do, Tanya. She wrote a 20-part series about corruption in the probate courts, which handle most of the conservatorship cases. And Venus had mentioned it earlier. It was entitled The Perils of Probate. And this again was for the Post News Group. She's currently a leader of Oakland Frontline Healers, a response organization of 26 nonprofits and 2 medical facilities organized for COVID-19 response. And she also serves on the board of Adamika Village Stop Killing Our Kids movement, which advocates for cessation of gun violence and peace in the streets of Oakland. So an enthusiastic and grateful welcome to Tanya. And Tanya, I'd like to start by noting that, Venus's and Kennett's testimonies help us understand a little bit more about how conservatees and conservatorships, or wards and guardianships, can be targeted for exploitation and isolated from their loved ones. Are these dynamics common when people have court-appointed conservators or guardians? And what's happening to their belongings, their estates, as well as their health? So I'll invite Tanya to unmute.
Thank you for having me. What we're looking at is a legacy of advantage. We're looking at predators that have free license. They're unregulated. It's a den of thieves. It actually is. And I came to this work via the secretary at the Post News Group. She had been in probate court since 2011. They had a $6 million estate. And within 6 or 7 years, it was basically just feeing them to death. By the time the probate court released them, they had $35,000 to split between the 2 of them. And when I say it's a legacy of advantage, what the probate court does is they take advantage of dissension among the family members. I saw some things in the chat. People were saying, how can I avoid this? You don't go to probate under any circumstances, because once you do, you're in their clutches. And like I said, I saw in the chat also someone said, it's not a color thing because it's African American politicians that do the same thing. Greed corrupts. And it's like picking up diamonds in a field. There's 2 ways the conservators benefit. They can conserve the person and they can conserve the estate. And what they do is when they conserve the estate, as Venus mentioned, they have total control over all the assets. Maxine Usry, the secretary that had become to her aid, like I said, they had a $6 million estate. They had cottages, they had apartment buildings, they had cleaners. And what the conservatives made them do was sell their properties in order to pay their fees. And it's so egregious that at one point, Maxine wanted to save the cleaners. And she went to the court and she says, can I buy my own cleaners back from the court for $800,000? They said no. And they sold it to $600,000 to an outside person. Like we say, we think there's some insider thing, who you know. And they took a $200,000 loss to prevent this African-American woman from saving her own property. So I say that to say that in an unregulated industry such as the conservatorship, it's the Wild Wild West. They can do whatever they want.
And just to clarify, you were saying that this, is not exclusive by any means to African Americans or people of color, but we also see the kinds of racial dynamics that Venus and Kennett have been describing. So it's important to acknowledge this can happen to anybody vulnerable, and there are racial dynamics in play. One of the things I want to turn our attention to, you talk a little about the probate courts and the professional conservators or guardians who are court appointed through those courts. Venus shared that you've been working as a journalist to expose dynamics of conservatorship abuse generally and their impact on Black communities in Oakland. I want to ask, where are the courts in this? Is nobody in the courts recognizing a problem, or any of them sanctioning or monitoring the conservators? Why is one of the questions the public will ask is like, well, why, if this is court appointed, why isn't the court making sure that things are well handled? So let's help us understand a little better, if we're novices to the issue. Why would the probate courts be doing this? What's going on there? What's their role?
As I said, it's advantage. If you come into the court and there is a disagreement and you have appointed conservator, they have power over the whole family. They can make all the decisions. And unfortunately, it's not, people say like, Venus, we're coming to you. You have superior knowledge to, decide how the state is going to be established or how our parents are going to be cared for. But that whole paradigm has shifted to the advantage of the court. And they milk these families until they're destitute. It's just pure outright greed. Now, the racial aspects of this is systemic in our whole society. We have a saying in the African-American community, when America catches a cold, the Black community catches pneumonia. If you look at our whole history, we have always been to a disadvantage, to the point where Black families make 10%, have 10% of a wealthy family. That even though we're 13% of the population, we're 35% of the population that gets incarcerated. If with the liar loans, African Americans lost 30% of their homes during the mortgage meltdown, because we were the ones that were given the liar loans, the toxic loans. So this thread of racism that goes through our culture pervades into the court system. Also, because we don't have the wealth that we can hire the attorneys to counter what the conservators are doing, we're kind of like left victimized. And that's how I got involved in writing court motions, because African-American families would want to respond, but they didn't have the economic resources to respond, which left them even more vulnerable than their white counterparts.
I think you've also acknowledged the problem of gentrification as it's interacting with conservatorship abuse, that Black elders are being targeted because they have homes that have become valuable in gentrifying neighborhoods. Have you seen a lot of that in Oakland? It's
rampant in Oakland. I was looking at a statistic that Oakland has lost 33% of their African-American population because they can no longer afford to live in Oakland. And like I said, when it comes before the court and there's a decision to be made on getting paid, the first thing they do is tell you have to liquidate your assets. Like Venus was indicating, they attach your Social Security, they attach the assets, and they have total control. And if you have money, you can't even have access to it because they have control over it. You lose total power.
Right. So you don't have money to hire private attorneys, even if the court would let you have one. And so, I'm asking though, are you seeing like Black elders in Oakland be targeted by professional conservators who want their homes in gentrifying neighborhoods? Is that an issue?
Yes, as you indicated, I wrote 20 articles, and how that generated was after I wrote the first article over Maxine Ussery. She started bringing other African-American elders who, like I said, once they get into the conservators mainstream, they're vulnerable, they're just victims. They're like a deer in headlights. They have lost total control. and their properties are taken to pay the fees of the conservator and everyone associated. Everyone gets enriched
Mhm,
except the person who's there asking for help. So
mhm.
the whole thing, when I was writing these articles, was also to educate people as to how to prevent even going into probate. We have to, until it's corrected, you just have to avoid probate at all, in all costs.
Thank you.
Because, most African Americans say, well, I got my will and I have my trust and I'm protected. We even went so far as to say, if anybody contests my will or my trust, they only get $1. The courts totally ignore your will. They totally ignore your trust. And let's face it, the probate court, if you look at they violate their own rules. On their rules, there's a list of about 11 people that should have in rank who should be in control of the person or the estate. And the first, of course, is the spouse, then it's the kids, then it's the aunts, then it's the friends, and at the very bottom is the public conservator. They ignore those first 10 people and they go right to public conservatorship.
Mhm.
Just deliberate.
I wish we had a lot more time to unpack this. Thank you so much, Tanya. And I'm sure this has been really important for our audience in particular to see, in particular to see why the courts are so implicated, why our legal system is culpable in this. I want to take a little remaining time to introduce and to invite some thoughts from Rick Black. And thank you to Tanya and Venus, who both suggested we invite Rick into this conversation. Rick, as noted, is with the Center for Estate Administration Reform. And he was first exposed to conservatorship in Nevada in 2013 when he and his wife were attempting to protect his wife Terry's father from exploitation there. They were unable to save her father, but their research and activism led to the release of dozens of victims of conservatorship abuse, and to significant statewide guardianship reforms and the criminal conviction of several guardians, attorneys, and a CPA who were using guardianship as a cover for their criminal activities. Their efforts were the genesis of the 2018 documentary, The Guardians by Billy Mintz. Rick also assisted HBO on their 2018 segment on guardianship frauds on John Oliver's Last Week Tonight, and Netflix with content on their documentary Guardians, Inc., which aired in March of last year, 2020. He regularly speaks on these issues and has spoken at the National Forum on Financial Exploitation by Conservators, sponsored by the National Center for State Courts and the Federal Department of Justice in 2017. Rick and Terry actively lobby for improved protections for vulnerable adults from the predatory legal community nationally, and founded the national nonprofit 501c3, again, Center for Estate Administration Reform, or CEAR, in early 2018 to advocate for reforms on a national scale. They've counseled or investigated 4,000 cases nationwide now, which is impressive in and of itself. And I just have to note, in your bio, the fact that we have to have a term like predatory legal community is really important and something for our audience to take note of. Rick, I want to, first of all, just thank you for being so deeply engaged. I know it means the world to other folks who have families who are experiencing similar dynamics to what happened to your father-in-law. And for me, as someone in the disability justice movement, I think your presence and work is very important. So again, want to welcome you heartily. And to start by asking you, one of the things I noticed that part of what tends to shock people is the involvement of court systems and putting vulnerable elders and people with disabilities under the power of professional predators. And Tanya has shared a bit about this already. What else can you tell us? What kinds of reforms do we need to challenge these dynamics in probate and family court systems?
Thanks, Beth.
Mhm.
My first comment would be to affirm everything that Tanya said, because I think she eloquently summed up a lot of key points. I actually first was introduced to the issues there in Alameda County through Tanya's articles and what the usury family faced. The best guidance for folks is, number one, to be prepared with your estate documents. And the two most important documents that anyone should execute is the durable power of attorney and the healthcare advance directive. But most importantly is to get those documents notarized and give them to your trusted agents and have a discussion with them. These aren't documents that you execute and put in your file cabinet. They are documents that you execute with considerable consideration, and you sit down with those parties and make sure that they have a copy of the document and they understand your expectations. And your number one expectation and demand must be that you never be nominated or ordered into a conservatorship or guardianship. 98% of the people that we've counseled it's less than that now, but it's certainly better than 90% of the people that we counsel have those documents in place. Sadly, they don't give them to their assigned agents, and that's a major problem. But we also recognize that routinely in dysfunctional courts, those courts that have been fully perverted by the local predatory legal community, your documents in the hands of the wrong agent or even in the hands of the right agent may be completely dismissed. But without them, you're really dead on arrival. And so we advocate for those. We are against trusts because trusts tend to put a bullseye on your back. People who have trusts have assets. They've spent money to try to protect those assets and stay out of guardianship or the probate court, so guardianship or conservatorship. And so often trustees and beneficiaries of trust are targeted because the trust assets will be assumed by the guardianship, and the attorneys who execute these frauds will submit for summary judgment, and there will be no accountings, there'll be no transparency on how the trust assets are being consumed by the parties. So again, preparation is key. Having a courageous agent like Venus, in the case of her mom. The first time I heard Venus's story, I was so impressed because many people who rescue their loved ones who are in a guardianship do end up going to jail. And the way that she rallied the press, Tanya, activists in the area, was textbook activism to rescue a person in need of help who's being exploited by this system. And to add additional comment, which I loved everyone's comments as we went through the hour or so, Beth, but this isn't a red or blue thing. This really isn't a black or white thing. It's a green thing. And that green comes from three primary cash flow streams. The biggest one is estate trafficking, so assets. And that's why we view, because we noticed early on, wow, the marginalized, this is all about the marginalized community. And we saw a higher propensity, the reference was made, Black community in the United States is 13%. And I felt that our numbers were close to double that. The people who were calling, begging for help, that couldn't get help, that were being exploited by the system. And when you look at the propensity of single parent families, when you look at the divorce rate within the Black community, the biggest one that I noticed was when you look at how much of Black family assets net worth is in real estate, often generationally past real estate. So you're talking generations of assets that'll be held by a patriarch or matriarch who may have had a couple of marriages, children from a couple of different mates, and that creates a target by the predatory legal community because they're looking for any reason to discredit the proposed ward and discredit the proposed agent. And so you quickly saw that this community was in greater danger although anyone can be taken from this community was in greater danger. The other point I want to make is the three different cash flow options. Estate trafficking, we've talked about it, but Medicaid fraud and Venus's comments on a residential group home, we call them HIRCs, Homes for Individual Residential Care, HIRC. Those homes are Medicaid qualified. They get very little oversight. So a destitute person can be placed under guardianship or conservatorship, placed into a HIRC home. We've seen residents in those facilities gaining as much as $15,000 a month in Medicaid entitlements that flow into the facility. And there's no one confirming that those treatments and therapies and prescriptions are actually being supplied to that individual. Most often they're completely isolated. Their mother, these are young adults. These could be 18, 20, 21. Mothers, fathers, siblings, family, friends. No one is allowed access to them, which makes the Medicaid fraud, one, limitless, but also completely without risk. And then the third component that we're seeing grow, it's a big problem in Florida, it's a big problem in Nevada, Virginia, other states, it continues to grow like a cancer, is hospitals using guardianship and conservatorship to mitigate risk. So if I have a patient that I'm not sure I'm going to get paid because they're unconscious, or I don't have an insurance card and I can't access, they're not paying their bill, or I have a demanding family that wants additional treatment for that loved one, I can call a local attorney and place that individual into guardianship, even though they don't need or qualify to be in a guardianship. Creating a fraudulent guardianship often is no more difficult than getting candy at Halloween. Judges give them out to crony attorneys with really no insight. And if we want to, we can talk about the Britney Spears case, because that's a great example of just how easy it is to get a conservatorship where one is not needed, and then hold on to it for 13 years and pay roughly $30 million in fees as you continue to exploit this perfectly lucid, vibrant, and capable entertainer. But the growth in those three flow streams and the revenues that can be generated to the predatory legal community and the dysfunction of this system, Beth, is why these problems continue to grow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for unpacking all of that, Rick. That was incredibly concise given its density and nevertheless very clear. And I know we all appreciate it. I'll briefly acknowledge, one of our emphases today is on racism, and you've both in this conversation indicated that it has broader reach. You were saying the real color at stake is green, and talked about why Black property is at risk. And I want to just invite everybody to hold the place right now and starting to try to think about the racial, the political, the economic complexity of this phenomenon, because it works a lot of different ways and it victimizes a lot of different groups, and it doesn't operate the same way for everybody. So we're going to have to sort of keep teasing that out. But I think it's great that we are starting that conversation. And I am hoping that some of our colleagues in fields like ethnic studies and critical race theory are going to start to bring some lenses to this, because I think that will really help too. We're out of time, but I'm going to still ask one last question, because I know folks in the audience want to hear your response to this. If you are a family member and you find that a loved one is being targeted by a professional predator, what are the steps that need to be taken to resist and expose what's happening beyond, in addition to some of the things that Venus has already so powerfully embodied for us? What do you do if someone you love is in danger?
Number one, get those 2 documents executed that I talked about. And number 2, close the gap. Distance is the ally of any exploiter. So you need to get that loved one, preferably in your home, where you can protect and care for them, as Venus did. That's what my wife and I were trying to do in the case of her father when the court stepped in and stopped it. But distance is the ally of the exploiter. So get your loved ones close.
Okay.
I was gonna say too, you know, there was 3 of us and we took my mother out. I'm not saying that everyone should do that, but Rick, there's something you say, the body, the physical is 100, how much possession? What is that saying, Rick?
Possession is 9/10 of the law.
There
That's
you
right.
go, there you go.
Right.
And so once we, you know, got our mom's body, like Rick said, get that person home, I can't tell you what to do. I only know what we chose to do, because my thing is, you can't kill my mom. I'll go to jail for her. And there would have been 3 family members they would have had to put in jail, and they didn't. So thank God. We do know other advocates who have taken their mother out of a facility, and they did end up in jail. The mother ended up passing away anyway because they put her back in the facility, and they're facing kidnapping charges right now. So, you know, it can go either way, but I mean, someone doing harm to your loved one, you know, the woman who gave birth to her, and then in the court system, the judicial system, thinking they know more than you about the person, especially when you're decent human beings, you know, and that's what I said, there's just no reasoning. There's no reasoning with them because they already have it in their mind, in their cronyism, as Rick says, that they're going to go after your assets, and the human, you know, humanity doesn't matter. The human factor doesn't matter. The caring doesn't matter. And that's what's sad, is that the court system, who I thought, you know, you go, you petition, they're going to understand your situation. They're going to work with the family. And if you get the right judge, there are some out there. We're not saying all judges are bad. All attorneys are bad. But in Alameda County here, we have some work to do out here, because there is some cronyism going on, and they're not hearing us, and they need to hear us and care about people again.
I would just like to add one other thing, and I don't want to scare people to death, but it is a reality. I've written about 2 cases where someone that had no right to conserve someone went for conservatorship and brought that person to the attention of the courts, and they were conserved. One was a bookkeeper, the woman's bookkeeper, and the other one was a cousin. So I'm telling people in the chat, don't go to probate under any means necessary, but also look to the right and left of you. Is there someone that would have an advantage if that person was conserved? Because I have had cases where you would not think it was coming, and that person brought it to the attention of the court, and they were conserved. It's really scary how easy it is to get a person conserved.
We just can't tie this conversation up. Meaning it opens many more questions than we've answered, including what the sort of long-term solutions need to be. So I'm sure that this won't be our last engagement with the issue, but we've taken so much already of our speakers' wonderful time and audience. I know you also have a lot to process. So we'll close for today. But again, I want to just honor each of you for joining us, and to direct people to connect with the Coalition for Elder and Dependent Adult Rights to learn more about how you can advocate for Eleanor and Ken, and to continue to follow Tanya as she promotes journalism on this issue, as she advances journalism on this issue, and to connect with Rick's work through the Center for Estate Administration Reform. Kennett and Venus, again, particular thanks for sharing your incredibly traumatic and vulnerable narratives, and Tanya and Rick for sharing your own personal relationships to the issue as well. Venus, it sounds like you have something
I
burning.
do want to say something. I have to, I know people in the chat were just, it looks like they're looking for places to go, like Rick and Linda. And there's also Faces Radio that comes on every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Luann Fleming, Hillary Hogue, Robin, and they have a radio show that's, you know, nationally, I think it's even internationally, that they do
What's the
every
name of
Wednesday night. It's called Faces, FACEUS, just like Face Us Radio.
Oh, okay.
And every Wednesday at 6 p.m. they're, you know, Hillary's always, and Luann looking for guests to be on. And it's a definitely great platform for us that we've been able to speak on there as guests, Rick.
How do we tap into it?
Yeah, what'd you say?
How do we get to Faces? Where do we?
Yeah, you can .com. I think it's facesradio.com. Is that right, Rick? Yeah,
Yes.
radios.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
And if anybody wants the information, you know, we can somehow get it to them. They can contact Beth and we can get it to Beth, Dr. Beth there.
Thank you so much again, everyone, speakers, audience. Appreciate you all so much and hope to see everyone again soon. Take care.
Thanks,
Thank
Beth.
you. Thank you.